Well, we have a terrific program tonight. We have Dan Long, who is the owner of Bushwood Nursery, which is a mail order nursery specializing in clematis or clematis, however you'd like to say it, and other vines. He's also an author and a past instructor at Longwood Gardens it's in Atlanta, Pennsylvania, uh, Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania, and has lectured and taught at seminars for over 20 years. By focusing on vines and climbers, he has gained extensive knowledge and images on the subject, which are shared in his presentations designed to inform and inspire his audience. And we welcome Dan, and we appreciate you coming and doing this program for us. So I turn
All
and
right.
welcome everybody who's here. Turn it over to you.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you
let me
very
just
much.
let me just say we'll do questions at the end, so please use the chat function and I will look at them and pass them along to Dan. That's the best way to do it. We'll do them at the end after his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to start sharing screen now. And you all should see a plant list and a QR code. Are we up on that, Jennifer?
Yes,
Yes, yes.
Great.
yes.
Okay, terrific. For those of you who didn't get the plant list ahead of time, here it is now. Let me get myself situated with something here real quick. And then we'll go. Okay, so the presentation tonight is called Grow Up, Using Vines and Climbers in Your Garden. And as Jennifer said, I am a nurseryman. I have a mail order nursery called Brushwood. We ship clematis and other climbers throughout the country. And this is actually our 25th anniversary this year. I'm very happy about that. I'm going to start off tonight pretty simply here with a couple of definitions. So, what is a vine? It is a plant with relatively long stems, which depends on other plants or surfaces for support. They may get that support by means of tendrils, twining around other objects, use of aerial rootlets, or by merely sprawling over another plant. In the case of climbing roses, the prickles are actually there to help support in addition to being a defensive mechanism for the plant. This is Rosa satigra, growing in eastern Tennessee. And I actually saw this on the side of I-80 while driving my teenage son and his dirty, smelly, tired boys, his friends, back from the Bonnaroo Music Festival. And despite their their opposition, I pulled off on the side of the road to take pictures of this because I had never seen it in the wild before. It's a beautiful, beautiful native plant, hardy from zones 4 to 9. It'll grow about 15 feet at maximum. It has a light, lovely fragrance. It is only once blooming. So this is the way I'm going to do these things. I'm going to talk about vines in general. I'm going to talk about specific characteristics. And as I dip in with specific examples, that's when we'll hit the plant list. So vines and climbers are opportunistic. It's very important to plant appropriately. Here is Decumaria barbara. We'll talk more about later on. It's a beautiful native plant, and it's just sprawling over a fallen branch where there's a light spot. Since I've moved to Georgia, I've mostly lectured in the South, and this whole opportunistic vine thing, well, Southern gardeners just understand that. This, of course, is kudzu, and it is everywhere down here. Now, I looked up before the presentation tonight, and I believe you probably have some kudzu up where you are as well, but it's probably not quite as rampant as it is down here. So it's important to bear in mind the opportunistic nature of vines when you're planting in your garden. So why and where do we plant vines? Well, first of all, when we find them in the garden center or online, we look at them as beautiful, absolutely stunning. And of course, they're good for filling in spaces. But sometimes the space is actually built for the vine. This is a very famous wall planting at Sissinghurst in southern England, where they grow Clematis Perle d'Azur. I love this one. It's easy to grow. It gets quite large, up to 12 feet, super hardy, all the way up to zone 4. Even grows in hotter climates. It's good to zone 11, and it has a very nice long bloom season. In fact, properly cared for, it could bloom all summer for you. Sometimes the climber can actually be the wall. This is at a public garden in northern Belgium, where the garden rooms are actually divided by archways that make tunnels. The tunnels make the wall, and then the opening in the tunnel opens up into the various rooms. This particular climber here, this is Westerland rose. It's plenty hardy, good to zone 5. I looked it up, and you all are mostly zone 7 where you are. Maybe there are some of you zooming in from other zones, maybe 6, maybe 8. But this one is definitely good to 5 to 9. Grows to about 12 feet. It makes a really nice structure on an arch. What I really love about Westerland is the fruity fragrance and the fact that it's a great repeater. Not all roses repeat particularly well, but this one does. And it has really nice clean foliage as well. Vines and climbers can fit in places you might not expect. This is in downtown Ghent, Belgium, where there's just a tiny opening in that walkway there, and they've got these roses blooming beautifully. And I was amazed when I saw this that there are roses within reach that weren't all plucked off as people were walking by. And I guess they just really appreciated the beauty of them and left them as is. Vines can be adaptable to difficult locations. Here's our native Gelsemium sempervirens in a tough spot. This is a parking lot in an old warehouse that's been converted into art spaces. And not only is it um, thriving in a difficult location, but they're using it to cover up a little utility space as well. Gelsemium sempervirens is, of course, a southeastern native. There's a selection called Margarita that is hardy all the way up into zone 6 and evergreen. It can grow up to about 12 feet. It's a really nice twiner. That evergreen nature of it makes it a great screen. Blooms in springtime with these yellow flowers. There are a couple of other selections as well. I really like to highlight Margarita, but there's a double flowered one called Pride of Augusta. There are a couple of pale yellow ones that are out there. But this is definitely the most hardy and my personal favorite. Going back to that occupying very little square footage, this is Hydrangea anomala petiolaris. There's a whole lot of plant there. It's absolutely stunning. It's softening up the architecture, and it's not taking up a lot of square footage at all. This is on a patio at a golf club in Wilmington, Delaware, where they have events, and they don't have a lot of free space for things like container plants and whatnot, but that tiny little hole is enough for it to thrive. Here, this is a Persian ivy, I believe, Heterocolchica. And in this case, what they've done is they've taken those boring support poles that are holding up part of the roof there, and they've softened it up architecturally, as well as making it more appealing. And this is a restaurant in the Belgian countryside. And some vines, by their very habit, will feature or hold to the architecture of a structure, either a natural structure or a man-made structure. This is Parthenopsis tricuspidata, also known as Boston ivy. And while it does take maintenance, you can see that by the habit of the way it grows, it does not arch outward from the surface. So you can still see the architecture as it is. There is a secondary benefit going on here as well. It's a deciduous, self-clinging vine. So you're actually going to get a little bit of summer cooling because the sun isn't going to heat up that masonry surface nearly as much with all of that green foliage there. So it's a green energy kind of a thing. My favorite of the Boston Ivies is Fenway Park, and it was named, of course, for the baseball field in Boston. And it's all of the Parthenocissus tricuspidatas are super hardy, all the way up to 4. down to zone 9. They can grow up to 40 feet tall, often less than that. Fenway Park in particular, I love for the golden or chartreuse foliage. And it is a lot less vigorous because it doesn't have all that deep green chlorophyll going on. The one limiting factor of this is that it will burn up a bit if it's left in full sun in the summertime, especially down here in the south, but you get plenty of hot sunny days up your way as well. Um, it really can brighten up a shady spot very nicely and can be well mannered with a little summertime pruning here and there. So there are a lot of utilitarian purposes to vines and climbers as well. This in this case, this is going back to using an evergreen here. This particular one is Bignonia dragon lady. Common name is crossvine. I really like to use the binomial names and the cultivar names instead of the common names because, for example, trumpet vine can refer to at least 5 different genera that I could think of, probably more. So to be specific, I try to stick to the binomial and I will often mention the common name for reference. The bignonias are native to the southeast. My favorite is Tangerine Beauty. This is it right here. And the reason I like it so much, it's just as vigorous and floriferous as Dragon Lady, but it has a tendency to repeat into the summertime a little bit more. Mostly they bloom in the spring, but this brings a little bit of color into the summer. I grow Tangerine Beauty over the east face of the gable end of the office at the nursery, and it's quite nice. Another utilitarian purpose would be for shade in summertime. This is a classic shade plant here. It is Dutchman's pipe, known as it's Aristolochia macrophylla, but I've seen that they're either considering or have changed it over to Isotrema macrophyllum now. But I think mostly when you look up Aristolochia macrophylla, you'll find it as that. And this is growing at the Scott Arboretum in the garden right behind the offices. And you'll see it's a nice shady spot in the summertime where you can relax. And I believe this was taken from the angle where the pond is, so you can sit in the shade and look at the pond on a hot summer day. An advantage to a deciduous vine, in this case it's a grape, but the Aristolochia is deciduous as well. You're going to still be able to use that seating area in the wintertime because the foliage is going to drop and you're going to get some sun shining through, so it won't be a cold place to sit in the winter. And of course, there are some of those that are much more highly ornamental than others. This is a beautiful little seating area here at this is De Tuinen van Appeltern in the Netherlands, which is an amazing place if you ever get a chance to visit. There are, I think, something like 100 garden rooms, and each one, or mostly, they are individual gardeners that handle each room. And I believe it's a sort of a display where gardeners take a room and show off their talents for commercial purposes. Anyway, this obviously is beautiful and a shady little spot to sit and rest. And this is Eden climbing rose here. Uh, nice long repeat bloomer from spring to fall on new wood. It'll grow 10 feet or possibly a little taller and hardy from zones 5 to 9. This was a favorite of ours at Brushwood, and we sold quite a few of them and we enjoyed them ourselves until we stopped growing roses back in 2016. So that you can get a sense of privacy by using these vines and climbers as a screen. This is at Chanticleer Garden in Wayne, Pennsylvania, which if you're on your way down to Longwood Gardens sometime on a road trip, stop off at Chanticleer. It's entirely manageable. It's maybe 30 acres, I think they have now, something like that. You might not even make it to Longwood because Chanticleer is a marvelous place. So when you're sitting inside this gazebo area, you have a sense of privacy, even though you can be seen. You can see out very clearly into the sunny areas, but it's a semi-cover, but it still allows airflow, and of course it's stunningly beautiful. This is a Schizophragma here in full bloom. Here's the same idea, but obviously just a little less formal. This is, I think it's called the Garden with No Name, and it's in Belgium, and a very interesting place, wonderfully done in a very informal style. You get the same effect here, lots and lots of visual coverage, but from the inside, you're not completely claustrophobic. It's still airy and you can still see out. So how do we train our vines? Now, when I'm at a dinner party or something like that, and people ask me what I do, I tell them I grow clematis. And when they look at me sideways, I say I grow clematis. And then if they still look at me sideways again after that, I say I grow mailbox vine. And everybody gets it then. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody should have a clematis on their mailbox, and the gardener in this case is doing a fine job. They're co-planting, they're using very compact clematis selections, and they're pruning them well so that they're not overwhelming the mailbox. Well, the obvious first choice for a vine or a climber is an arbor. It's in the case of clematis, they're not twiners, they're not clingers. They climb and hold by wrapping their petioles, the leaf stem, around slender objects. So you need to bear in mind how they climb in order to decide how to train them. And we'll talk about the different ways that vines and climbers actually hold on. This particular one is Clematis romantica, super bulletproof hardy all the way up to zone 3. Still grows down in the hottest climates in zone 11, gets about 8 feet tall, and it blooms early to late summer. And it gets hard pruned. This is a group 3 clematis, gets a hard pruning. And of course, the trellis that it's climbing on doesn't have to be intentional. This is an old woodshed. A gardener bought the property and did not like burning wood, so they turned it into a little seating area. You can see the table in the background, and just threw a couple of wires on the structure of the woodshed, and it became a trellis. I would note that Clematis romantica is subject to a little bit of powdery mildew, so you definitely want good airflow and maintain your soil moisture during the growing season. I actually really like the natural way that these plants evolve to grow. This is a Viticella hybrid at the Frelinghuysen Arboretum in northern New Jersey. And just look at that beautiful light clematis structure dancing across the top of its host plant. And even a climbing rose can be done this way. Although I'll be honest, this is a Chanticleer. I'll be honest, there is a steel pipe hiding in the host plant in this case because the structure of the host isn't sturdy enough to support the mass of the rose. Where it does work very well naturally is in, say, old fruit trees or something like that, an old non-bearing fruit tree that's aging out. I've seen them climbing roses in trees all over Holland and the UK, for example, and it's quite a sight. You would want to make sure that you pick something that's an appropriate mature height for the host plant, or figure out where you want that vine to end up in the host plant for best visual. This is Westerland rose again, and this is an example here where the rose isn't matching the height of the tree. Still pretty, nothing wrong with that. It's adorning the trunk of the tree. There it is up close. So many vines are self-clinging. This is that Decumeria barbara that I talked about before. This is a southeastern native, and this is at the Scott Arboretum in Swarthmore. And it's a beautiful plant with glossy, like almost tropical foliage, and the fall color is a really lovely butter yellow. The flowers, maybe you recognize a little bit, it's a cousin to climbing hydrangea. It just doesn't have the sterile florets around the perimeter. It's hardy up to zone 6, so most of you zooming in here can probably grow this. Technically, it can grow to 40 feet. It is a southeastern native, as I mentioned, and it does love moisture. The first place I saw this growing in the wild, it had its feet dangling into an old well house, and it was down the trail just down from the house where we live right now. Less of a stretch from traditional, even if it's a self-clinger, you can train it onto a vine, or you can train a vine onto an arbor. This is sort of what we would call a semi-clinging vine. This is Campsis morning calm. It's Campsis grandiflora, which is not a native, but I really like it a lot. It doesn't sucker. The corollas are much larger, and look at that flower cluster. That is the end of one stem. Beautiful plant. Hardy to zone 6. Even though it's not a native, the hummingbirds still come to it. They love it. It's really an outstanding plant, morning calm. So vines don't necessarily have to go up. This is an example of a private garden in Western Connecticut where the Hydrangea petiolaris is draping over some pond equipment as a visual block. And you don't see the pumps or anything like that. And it even does seem to muffle the sound just a little bit. And they can sort of be useful as ground covers as well. Even though they might not lay in as much as a traditional ground cover, many of them are floppy and scrambly. This is Clematis arabella, party from zones 4 to 11. Officially, it clocks in at 5 feet tall, but it's a real scrambler. The genetics of this are really deeply in Clematis integrifolia, which is a perennial, not a climber at all. So when integrifolia is crossed with a climbing clematis, you get a larger flower that's more upright, but it doesn't really cling and climb particularly well. It scrambles. This is used as a ground cover off the edge of a patio in a wonderful clematis garden, private garden just south of Atlanta. This is also pruning group 3. Another of my favorite clematis is Raguchi. It is also a scrambler, but can climb just a little bit better than Arabella. Hardy to zone 5, grows to about 8 feet tall and can bloom all summer long and really takes the heat very nicely. A word of caution about Raguchi, though, is that it is probably more susceptible to powdery mildew than most other clematis, and that's part of its genetics. It has a Viorna group clematis in it, and they tend to get powdery mildew. So let's talk a little bit about structures and attachments. This is Campsis radicans, the traditional native trumpet vine growing on the entrance building to Longwood Gardens. And I just want to make note of something here. To espalier a campsis is really pretty amazing. And to keep it in the condition that it is and still have it bloom, a campsis, if it's pruned back to keep it in shape, will never bloom because it flowers at the ends of its stems. So what they've done here, not only are they keeping it in check and beautiful as an espalier, but they are tying down the stems as opposed to pruning them back in order to get the bloom still, even though it's all structured in the way they're training it. This is interesting. This is a private garden in the Netherlands, and I like it and I don't like it, and I'll tell you why. First of all, they've got that wire mesh that's kind of like a canvas for vines. You could really just put things just about anywhere, allow things to grow anywhere, but it's tight up against the wood. I really prefer to see the structure that's going to train these vines and climbers suspended off the wall. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Also, their choices could be a little bit better. Everything there is a little too tall until you get to the back of the wall there. I like to see plantings that have different heights, and clematis and other climbers are available at every range of mature height you could think of. Another way of attaching is using copper wire with anchored bolts. And this is, again, from my way of looking at this, this is too tight to the wall. Think about suspending away from the wall. In this case, looking beyond that, the copper will eventually oxidize to a nice verdigris. If you've got a deciduous vine or an evergreen vine, it's going to disappear anyway. But think about the colors of your suspension. If you've got, say, a group 3 clematis that's going to be pruned back hard so that the structure is going to be visible during several months of winter and early spring as the plant regrows. If you've got, for example, annual vines, you may want even to consider a completely removable structure. This is going back to Longwood Gardens at the front entrance. Obviously, this is a very heavy-duty commercial version of a standoff, and this holds that climber away from the wall. It's better for the wall and it's better for the plant because the plant gets good airflow behind it, critical for ones like roses and, as I mentioned, Clematis ragucci, for example. You don't have to buy into this commercial version, though. You can replicate this with hook eyes or anything you can do that's still sturdy but supports the plant away from the wall. And of course, another way to do that is with trellises. The trellis can be out in the middle of a garden bed, but it can be 6 inches or 1 foot away from a wall. Another thing about planting by a wall, when we build our structures, most homes and office buildings are backfilled right near the construction area, and the backfill is almost never going to consider the garden potential. It's going to be junk from construction, basically old concrete bits and stones and whatnot, and undersoil and things like that that aren't necessarily conducive. And also, you get what's called a rain shadow underneath the eave of the house. And so you might think it's rained a lot, but your planting might actually be in a really dry soil area and oftentimes with a really terrible pH and fertility. So think about that. Think about amending your soil if you need to plant there, but consider coming away from the wall. Better for you, better for the plant, and better for the wall itself too. You're not going to get mold building up from the tight air. Oh, we're going to talk about these trellises. Okay, let's go. The one on the left, that's the one that you get on the plant in the garden center that says, "Hi, I'm a vine. Plant me on a trellis." It's never going to be the right size for the mature size of the plant. Tease the plant off of that one right away when you plant it. There's no need to keep it unless you just don't have anything else to put it on right away. The second and third ones are fairly tall. It's really hard to get a trellis as tall as a lot of our mature vines are going to be. Many clematis will get 8, 9 feet tall, many of the other vines even taller, but it's hard to find the really tall ones. If you can, look for a more if you've got a trellis that you absolutely adore, or a tuteur, try to look and match that mature size of the plant to the trellis. And then the two on the right, well, they're just way cute. My wife bought those, and we had to find a home for them. I think they came from IKEA many years ago. But again, you're going to have to find a very compact clematis to go on that. I think I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Another nice way to do that is with a heavy wooden structure that larger vines can grow on. This is at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, right on the other side of town here. And this is an entryway to one of their woodland paths, but they also grow vines up the sides. This is in the wintertime, right before spring when everything was cut back. But it is kind of a mop head across the top with blooming flowers in season. There's some other variables about location that are really important beyond talking about the rain shadows and the soil conditions. This is a Great Dixter, and I know I'll take it a bit of a punishment for saying this, but Great Dixter isn't perfect. What they've done here, they've got this wonderful Lonicera growing, but it's in a windy location and it's tied to a single post and it's whipping around and it's hurting the plant and it's making the plant visually less appealing. And it took me about 15 minutes to get a photograph of it. So consider Your planting location, if they had put that on an A-frame instead and given it 2 or 3 more supports, it would be much better for the plant and it would be much more visually appealing. Kids all grown and moved out. I see another arbor, hun, and that is exactly what this is. This is at a private garden in the Netherlands where the gardener just said, "Well, it's not being used. I'm gonna make use of it." And unfortunately, they've they've got an invasive vine growing on it. But I guess maybe it's not invasive for them. Speaking of kids, we need to do more to get all of our kids and our grandkids outside more often. This is my daughter Sophia when she was just a toddler, and it's at Longwood Gardens in the Idea Garden, where they make gardening fun and playful for every member of the family. This is not only a vine used to make an arbor, but in the summertime, they grow annual vines all across the top of it, and gourds hang down on the inside. A wonderful place to play. It's sort of a kid's igloo of vines. Let's talk a bit about fragrance. There are lots and lots of fragrant climbers. This is Lonicera paraclimanum Varsaratina florida. It is a Dutch honeysuckle, absolutely stunning plant, and I love this one because it's more compact than some of the other ones, and just fantastic flowers. This is not invasive. Many years ago, I decided that brushwood would never offer any invasive climbers, and we've stuck with that, despite a lot of people asking us for things like sweet autumn clematis, which I absolutely refuse to grow or offer. Another selection of Dutch honeysuckle. This is Winchester. The flowers are slightly larger and a little bit richer in color. And this is Graham Thomas, sort of the granddaddy of the fragrant Dutch honeysuckles. This one is the most, has a really nice long summertime bloom season, hardy to zone 5, and it can grow up to 20 feet. But it's easy to keep these in check, keep them growing a little bit lower than that. And of course, plenty of fragrant roses. This climber is Madame Alfred Carrier, grows to 20 feet tall. It's intensely fragrant and it repeat blooms very nicely. Here it is growing at Sissinghurst again, southern England. Not only is it fragrant when you're sitting by the door on the outside, but if you open up a window, it'll bring that fragrance right inside the upstairs for you. Another consideration for your climbers is utility for wildlife. This is Passiflora incarnata, commonly known as maypop, and it provides nectar for pollinators. I don't know if you can see, there's some carpenter bees on there right now. It is also the larval food source for the variegated fritillary butterfly. And I checked, and the variegated frit is in your is its range includes your area there. And of course, many of our climbers are wonderful for attracting hummingbirds. This is Campsis radicans. It is native. It can be a bit of a bully in the garden, and that's why I love native plants. Don't get me wrong, and I do offer one Campsis radicans called Jersey Peach. That's a beautiful peach color. But for the most part, in a smaller garden, you have to be careful with something like Campsis radicans. And of course, for hummingbirds and butterflies, our native honeysuckle Lonicera sempervirens is really terrific. It is not fragrant, but it's great for wildlife. In another way, songbirds love their berries. This is Lonicera John Clayton. And when we first moved to Georgia, I planted one of these off of our back deck, grew it through a crepe myrtle, and it bloomed straight through the winter the first year for us. Fantastic plant, super long bloom season. John Clayton. Another really nice selection of the native. This one is a little bit more relaxed in habit, could be a nice spiller as opposed to an upright grower. This is Major Wheeler. Deep, rich red color, really fantastic. Very long bloom season. It's become a very popular plant. Now, the native Aristolochia, I mentioned Aristolochia or Isotrema macrophylla earlier. They're also the larval food source for the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. And you're right at the far northern range for that one. A word of caution, don't just get Aristolochia, because the tropical Aristolochias, while they are beautiful, they have much more interesting flowers. They have a toxin in them. The pipevine swallowtail butterfly will be fooled and she will lay her eggs on them, but when the larvae start to feed, they will die from that. And of course, plenty of vines and climbers can feed us while providing beauty and shade. In this particular case, I think of grapes right away, but this one is hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta isai. Super duper hardy, I think zone 3, but it does take a very long ripening season. Now, most of the Actinidia argutas, you'll need a male and a female, but Isai, ISSAI, is self-fertile, and this one is growing at Longwood Gardens. Some have interesting and attractive flower clusters. This is Apios americana, hardy all the way to zone 4, but generally considered a southeastern native. The common name is groundnut because the roots form these nodules that are sort of potato-like in a way, and this was a staple food source for Native Americans. Doesn't that look delicious? That's an old one. When they're younger, they're actually fairly tasty. You can slice them up and eat them like French fries, if you'd like. And from what I understand, they have a better nutritional profile than our typical potatoes. Now, what about vines for containers? Suitability can be an issue, but more can be done than you might expect. And of course, leave it to Longwood Gardens to make a bonsai wisteria. I mean, wow, that is just amazing work. Typically, I like to recommend larger pots. One of the killers of any container growing, especially in climates like ours and yours, we're similar, believe it or not, as far south as we are, we're just into zone 8 here, is the freeze thaw cycle. If a container is left out for the winter, it'll get above freezing during the day and below freezing at night repeatedly and sometimes into a deep freeze. The container isn't as likely to stay frozen. And especially a dark color. So I like light colored containers for practicality, although it's not always visually appealing. And the larger the container is, the better the soil chemistry is going to remain stable, and the easier it is going to be to manage your water. Lastly, and very importantly, if you've got a trellis on there and a climber, it acts like a sail in the wind. And so the heavier container isn't going to get knocked over as readily. Hanging baskets are another great container choice. In this case, we've got a plant that isn't fully hardy. It's a passiflora called Betty Miles Young, and we're going to want to bring it inside in the wintertime. Also, another advantage to using a hanging basket for something like this, Betty really likes to put on a few feet of growth before flowering, so you can loop those stems over repeatedly. It'll fill out the look and feel of the hanging basket, and you'll have those blooms where you want them. And of course, they take up zero real estate. It's really great. This is at an entrance to a restroom at Longwood Gardens where they didn't want anything down on the ground in front of the entrances. They didn't have enough room, but it's a visual appeal right up above. And of course, think about the vine's other seasons as well. This, of course, is our native Parthenocissus quinquefolia, also known as a Virginia creeper. And you just about can't beat it for fall color. Absolutely stunning. It can be especially true for an evergreen if you have a long winter season. This is Bignonia capreolata, and normally that's going to go into sort of a red russet color. This particular one at the Atlanta Botanical Garden had this amazing rich purple brown color in the winter foliage. And the vines can in the off what we consider the off season, they can be in bloom. This is Ampelaster carolinianus, or climbing or walking aster, also a southeastern native, but it is hardy up to where you are. It's good to zone 6. At its far northern range, it's going to be fully herbaceous, but it grows back very well. It's really bulletproof to grow and can bloom in October and November, and we've even had it blooming in December down here in Georgia. Here it is again, and it's starting to show some nice fall color. This is probably around Thanksgiving, still blooming, and pollinators absolutely love this. I'm also a beekeeper, and my honeybees love Ampelaster. It's blooming when pretty much nothing else is in flower around us. And then, of course, for the ones that are deciduous, there's a very interesting look to many of them. This is Hydrangea petiolaris. And of course, the architecture of the stems is fabulous. And in this case, you also have that exfoliating bark to add to the texture and the appeal. Fruit can be persistent in many of our climbers. This is Rosa virginiana. I'm not quite a climber, sort of classed as one, but has really lovely rose hips. Very ornamental, and they persist for quite a while on this. And of course, other plant parts can provide that same ornament. This is Clematis virginiana, a native, of course. The seed heads have that really fluffy cotton ball sort of a look for quite a while. They can get mashed down and blown off in a heavy windstorm or a hard rain, but if you've got decent weather, they'll last for quite a while. Many of the clematis have interesting seed heads. This is almost certainly a Texensis hybrid, but I don't have it documented. And I love that Dr. Seuss kind of a look to the seed heads. And these can even be used in a cut flower arrangement. And of course, that same effect, that Dr. Seuss floppy moppy look, doesn't necessarily have to happen at the end of summer into fall. This is Clematis alpina, which blooms very early in the spring and then has these wonderful seed heads late spring into early summer. Now, I promised I'd talk about clematis. We're maturing into a new golden age of clematis breeding, and it's very exciting. The breeders are working on things like better color, the size of the bloom, disease resistance, compact habit, and repeat blooming. This photograph here is of Van Zost Clematis Specialty Nursery in the Netherlands. The main breeder there was Wim Schneuer, and one of his really successful series is the River series. He's worked with the Integrifolia hybrids, and remember, I mentioned that is a long bloom season and a scrambling versus climbing habit. Interestingly enough, they've found a market for these in the cut flower industry, so you can find a lot of these hybrids. They may not have the same name as I'm going to tell you because they're marketed for the floral industry, but they are Wim Schneuer's Integrifolia hybrids. This particular one is Star River. My new favorite is Hudson River. Grows to about 4 to 5 feet. It's a scrambler like Arabella. It has more flowers, and honestly, I think it's a richer color. Not a great photograph, but it gives you the idea. I think this might end up being more popular than Arabella. And of course, Hudson River is a great name. Vim also worked with a lot of the large flowered hybrids. This is a really compact one called Baby Star. It grows only 4 to 6 feet, and when you're looking at that trellis or tutor, it came to you 7 feet tall and you stuck it in the ground and it's only 6 feet tall now. A nice compact clematis like this will look great on it. Another one, this is Clematis Liberty. Beautiful flowers, lovely name. Grows only 4 to 6 feet tall. The flowers are 5 inches across. It is proven hardy as far as zone 6. It's probably hardier than that based on the genetics, but we're not going to claim that until we know for sure, until somebody braves it. Um, I I really think this one is stellar, and the only downside to it, to be honest, is that it's a little bit slow to get going. If you're patient, it's going to be worth it. The late Ton Hanink from the Netherlands. He's classed officially as an amateur breeder because he didn't do it for a living. He was in the pharmaceutical industry, but he did some fantastic breeding with a lot of very rare plants. These are his Cadmia selections. They are also proven to zone 6, but they might be hardier than that. They only grow 6 to 9 feet tall. They are spring blooming and they are richly fragrant. The one on the left is sugar sweet blue, and the one on the right is sugar sweet lilac. And we've followed in his footsteps at Brushwood, and we have a new selection that we've just named called Evelyn. All of them bloom in the spring. They'll bloom on new wood, which is unusual for a clematis, and they are really wonderfully fragrant. Also by Ton Hanink is Clematis Burning Love. Really nice, true red. Everybody's computer monitor is going to be a little bit different, but this is an actual red. On my one monitor on my laptop, it's showing up a little purple, and then the other one, it's Dayglow orangey red. So I don't know what you're seeing, but I promise you it's a real red. It's a nice, long blooming Viticella hybrid, hardy all the way to zone 4. In the UK, Guernsey is still producing quite a lot of compact, wonderful, large flowered hybrids. This is Giselle, grows only 4 feet tall, has the potential to bloom all summer long. If you're going to have it bloom all summer, pay attention to fertility and irrigation. It's going to matter. Clematis are hungry, but if you're generous with them, they'll be generous with you. Another one of his, this is only growing to about 4 feet tall, a really lovely red called Nubia. Um, there, a lot of these newer hybrids aren't necessarily a new form or color, but improvements in disease resistance, bloom time, and the quantity of the blooms. This is their Olympia, grows only 3 to 5 feet tall, really nice, true blue color. It blooms in the spring and can repeat in the late summer or the fall. Also super hardy, up to zone 4. Elena grows 3 to 4 feet. Very nice color. I like this one a lot. It's been true for us and really performing well. I'm going to have to move right along here. I'm going to run out of time on you, but this is a Polish breeder named Stefan Marczynski has produced quite a lot of hybrids. This is Julka, which is the shortened name for Juliana, his daughter. Grows to about 8 feet. Really hard to photograph, unfortunately. The pictures that are you'll find of Julka do not do it justice. It's a wonderful velvety purple color. Brother Stefan Franczak, Polish monk, produced quite a few. This is Słowianka, grows to about 8 feet tall. It is also a Viticella hybrid, which means it is going to have a long bloom season. When we're looking for duration of bloom, think about the Integrifolia hybrids and the Viticella hybrids for nice long summer bloom. A neat little Tangutica hybrid that's a white flower, grows up to 18 feet tall. It'll bloom later in the summertime like Tangutica does. Nadezhda, this has super large flowers, grows to about 6 to 8 feet tall. Very nice plant. It's an unfortunate thing for a lot of people. They're turned off when they can't pronounce a name, so they'll avoid a plant. When it's got an easy name, they'll tend to like it, or if it has a name of a family friend or a relative, they'll go for it. I think we should all reach out beyond that and grow ones that we're not comfortable pronouncing like this. To be honest, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing Nadezhda correctly, but I love this plant. Clochette Pride is in the Macropetala group. Very nice. Normally blooms in the spring. This one's better because it repeats into the summertime. Clematis Starfish. I love this one. This was bred by Polly Hill out on Martha's Vineyard, and I was able to go up and rescue it from the Arboretum. They allowed me to take cuttings many years ago and brought it down. And even in Georgia's summer heat, it had flowers on it for 6 months straight. Very nice plant. I'm going to run out of time, but I really want to talk about color combinations. Um, Everywhere I go, I find people growing clematis and climbing roses together, or clematis and other flowering plants together. And I'm a nurseryman by trade. I am not a garden designer. So I learn at every garden I visit. And here we have a nice cool color combination. This is probably Perle d'Azur with a nice climbing rose. You can go with hotter color combinations as well. This is one I never would have thought of, a reddish purple with pink, but they look great together. Here we have four different climbers all in one spot together. Fantastic. Now this kind of work, you have to pay attention to pruning carefully, and you also have to pay attention for good fertility and good irrigation during the growing season because this is very intensive horticulture here. Here, turning around 180 degrees in that same garden, they've got three clematis and two different roses growing on one arbor. I do this a little bit at Brushwood. This is the climbing rose is called raspberry twirl, and the clematis, the first clematis is night veil, and the second clematis that is just about to come into bloom is Heather Herschel. And here you see, as the rose is beginning to finish its first flush, the Heather Herschel is coming on, maintaining that pink color combination. And I'd like to tell you, I got that just right and planned it really carefully, but it was entirely lucky. And here's a better shot of Heather Herschel. Think about the host when you're planning the color of the flowers. Here's this bright green, almost chartreuse grapevine, and a really rich purple that's probably Clematis étoile violette growing in there. That chartreuse and purple look great together. Here's Clematis texensis growing through this really lovely glaucous foliage of the host plant. Very nice. This is also at the Scott Arboretum. Think about the neighboring colors, of course, in your garden design. This is at Sissinghurst, which is super well known for color. And we've got here Ipomea lobata next to a potentilla, and the colors just match up perfectly. Speaking of that, tender climbers, haven't really mentioned yet. Here we have Cissus discolor, also known as Rex begonia vine. The flowers are almost non-existent. They're tiny and not ornamental, but the foliage, who cares about the flowers? There's just fantastic variegation on the front, that pewter sheen on the front of the leaf, and the stems have color, and the reverse of the foliage has color as well. You mentioned Passiflora Betty Miles Young before. It's one of three of the Riverside hybrids. My friend Miles Irvine over in England developed these, and they have really solid performance whether they have to be grown as annuals or not. They're fully hardy to zone 8 and evergreen. Up where you are and where we are, they don't persist, but they do come back very nicely. And they have, he's bred them for super large flower size, really dramatically larger than, say, for example, Passiflora incarnata or Passiflora caerulea. Another hybrid that I like an awful lot, this is iridescence. It is the same cross as incense, which you may heard of before, which is a Passiflora incarnata hybrid. But this is a much better plant in production as well as in the landscape. Hardy definitely to zone 7, possibly even colder. Grows to about 10 to 15 feet. I grow this in a container at the office, and it is super hardy, comes back every year for us, even grown above ground. Last but not least, think about the interaction with architecture. Right here you have Clematis royal velours. It's a Viticella hybrid. They often have very small foliage and a much more open habit. So not only are you getting the ornament there with very little structure showing holding that vine up, but you're featuring the vine as well. Royal velours is super hardy, grows to about 10 feet tall. This is at Sissinghurst once again. And look at that. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. but does not hide the wonderful old architecture. So no matter how you grow your vines and climbers, I wish you all success. Thank you very much.
Dan, this was great. So informative. Um, a lot of great information. We have some questions, of course. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. First of all, we have a lot of deer in our area. So one, and I was going to ask you this, any insight as to what's more deer resistant than something else, or sort of not?
Unfortunately, if you have a big enough herd and they're hungry enough,
They'll eat it.
they'll go into things that are even considered classically deer resistant.
Right.
I mean, we even get deer down here. They'll even nibble at the hellebores.
Mhm.
It's really something.
Right.
In general, there are some that are less appealing. Um, they don't like a lot of the honeysuckles as much. They don't like wisteria as much. Now, I say wisteria, when I say that, I caution you. Again, I think there's a lot of invasive potential from the Asian wisterias. We only offer native wisterias, but
Mhm.
they have generally the same deer resistance level.
Okay. Um, so one question is, can you speak um, to vines that will grow well in shade in our zone? So we used to be 6. I don't know. Now I actually looked it up. It says 7. So it's between 6 and 7. I don't know.
Right.
But any thought about what grows? We have a ton of woods and tall trees, so we have a lot of shade.
Sure. Well, you can look for ornament in some of the flowering plants will still bloom in the shade. For lower light levels, dappled shade, some of the clematis are pretty well known for that, like Clematis Nellie Moser, and I've seen Dr. Rupel blooming in fairly significant shade. The Montanas will. Um, and think in terms also of foliage instead. The Parthenocissus Fenway Park is going to add a really bright splash to a shady spot, and it'll grow fine there.
Right.
You won't get as much fall coloring up on, say, for example, Virginia creeper if it's grown in a shadier spot. It's not going to be as brilliant, but you can get that summertime color. Now, there's another one, Parthenocissus henriana, silver vein creeper that
Mhm.
has really pretty foliage even in the summertime, and it'll color up in the fall.
Great. Okay. Um, Someone's asking recommendation for camouflaging and creating beauty around a chain fence. There's deer, of course. It's mostly shaded, so same things that you just mentioned.
Yeah, camouflaging, I think of for chain link, I think of twining vines and I think of evergreens, and that Gelsemium margarita comes to mind right away. And actually, it's pretty darn deer resistant as well. It is poisonous. So if you be mindful if you plant that.
Okay. Where do you recommend we we people get climbing roses vines from? You said you don't start have them anymore. You don't grow them anymore.
Right. I
Cultivate.
made the decision in 2016
Yeah.
to drop all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tropicals and all the climbing roses. I haven't purchased any in some time now, but
Okay.
I used to like Antique Rose Emporium a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, and if someone was a novice, a first time clematis person, grower, is there one or two you would suggest that would be easy, not susceptible to powdery mildew, and easy to grow and long lasting? So, like, what would be
Sure.
your 2 favorites or your 3 top favorites
Well, in general,
for us? Yeah.
look to the Integrifolia hybrids and the Viticella hybrids. They're very easy and generous. They don't have the dinner plate flowers, but they're really, I think they're very appealing. And specific examples of that would be
Yeah.
Arabella and Hudson River in the integrifolias, and Polish Spirit and Madame Julia Korovon in the Viticella hybrids.
Polish, say it again, spirit.
Polish Spirit
Uh-huh.
and Madame Julia Korovon, a really pretty red. And of course, Burning Love is a really nice, easy red.
Okay. Um, how often do you fertilize? And what do you like to use?
I
Or how
love
often? Yeah.
Espoma Rose Tone. I think
Mhm.
it's a really great product for clematis and
Okay.
general use. It's a little pricey. Any good rose formula or tomato formula are generally good for clematis and are fine for other climbers as well. Um, and I fertilize a lot, a whole lot.
I,
We're on tired old cotton land here in Georgia,
uh-huh.
and there's no topsoil. It's all subsoil,
Interesting.
and we're throwing organic matter down all the time. We're fertilizing a lot. I'll supplement with liquid feed. We'll lay it all down. Clematis really enjoy a lot of
You
fertilizer.
like a lot of fertilizer.
Yeah, especially some of those newer hybrids that are more floriferous. That's an energy intensive process for creating flowers.
Flowers, yeah.
So feed, feed, feed. I can't say exactly how much for you all because it depends on your soil conditions, and I'm actually supposed to say read and follow label instructions.
Right. And then another question is, after flowers bloom, do you recommend leaving them be or do you recommend pruning? I know you have a whole section on pruning, which I haven't looked at yet, but what do you recommend once flowers are bloomed and then they're finished? Do you prune?
Well, deadheading is, if you're cutting
Deadheading.
off the production of the seeds, you're saving energy for the plant
Right.
as a general rule. In
Mhm.
some cases, this is kind of cool. The Viticella hybrids, if you read a lot of the literature, it comes out of England, and their season is a lot later than ours. So they're going to tell you the Viticella hybrids are going to start blooming midsummer. Well, Madame Julia Coravon used to start blooming for me in May in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And after that first flush of blooms is done, you can actually hack it back to the ground and reflush it, fertilize it plenty, lots of irrigation, reflush it and bloom it again. And I know a gardener who gets 3 rounds out of Clematis jackmanii every year. Another reason for doing this is if you have interesting foliage. There's an herbaceous perennial clematis called Clematis recta purpurea. We grow a nice selection called Midnight Masquerade, and another one, Recta purpurea compacta. It has beautiful, beautiful, rich purple foliage when it first forms, but it tends to kind of go into like a dull verdigris over time. Well, some people will actually cut that back repeatedly to get that flush of rich color where it matches their garden color needs.
Interesting. One of our actually garden club members is asking, do you publish any kind of catalog?
I have never printed a catalog. It's a
Okay.
whole lot easier and better, I think, to remain online. We're at brushwoodnursery.com.
Mhm.
The neat thing about that is that the inventory is always live.
Right.
We are always selling out of things. We grow so many different things and some of them in small quantities. By the time somebody fills out the order form on the printed catalog and mails a check,
Something different
half of
happened.
what they're looking at might be sold out.
Yeah.
Whereas if they go to the website, I'll say it again, brushwoodnursery.com,
Mhm.
um, what is available at that time is actually available. And when they purchase, it'll be reserved for them. So to me, it's a whole lot better than a printed catalog. Um, it,
And
it's
when, yeah, good, good.
it's also a lot less expensive.
Yes, of course. When do you usually ship to us, to New York per se?
We do things a little bit differently. We
Okay.
ship a lot to home gardeners, but we'll also ship to botanical gardens and landscapers and They may have a holding facility, a controlled greenhouse environment.
Mhm.
So in all cases, the customer chooses their delivery date.
Okay.
We don't specify you will get
Got it.
yours in early May, for example.
Unlike
Um,
dahlias.
as a
Yes.
as a part of the checkout process, you will pick whatever it is, and we recommend choosing a date somewhere around your last frost date
Yes.
because the plants will be actively growing,
Mhm.
and it's as much for the warmth of the soil as a threat of frost because that warm soil is going to help those roots to start growing in right away.
Yeah. Usually for us, it's after Mother's Day.
There you go.
It's usually, yeah. Well, this was great. I think we covered the questions. I really appreciate your time and everything. I found it extremely informative, and thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I'm glad it worked out.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for everything and just to tell the audience that we videotaped it. So probably in a week or two, it will be on our website and you could review everything he said again and see the good pictures. So the photographs are beautiful. Thank you also.
Thank you,
So
Dan.
thank you, Jen. Thank you, Dan. And thank you all for coming. And please
night.
go to our website to see all the programs that we offer. And you will soon see this program on our archived website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.